Coming up, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast is on. We're going to be looking at Electric Boogaloo, the untold story of, or the wild untold story of canon films. So a lot of fun there. It's kind of a shorter episode. Also, there were some tech issues in terms of some background noise. So I'm still getting the hang of using Clean Feed or Clear Feed. I think it's called Clear Feed or Clean Feed. I can't remember. But I'm still getting the hang of using that for times when I don't use Skype. And there were some noises. I don't think it's too bad. I will say it's not throughout the entire episode. So if you hear some background stuff, just know that it's not the entire episode that you'll be hearing there. But otherwise, I mean, it's a really, really great conversation that we have. We get into kind of how that documentary covers the history of canon, what worked, what didn't work with them, what was ultimately their downfall. We talk about Superman 4, Masters of the Universe, all of that kind of thing. So very fun conversation there. And then next week, Ty from Columbus is back on for his monthly hit as we look at Shepherd Code and Fortress. Not the Fortress with Christopher Lambert, of course, but the one with Bruce Willis and Chad Michael Murray. And who else was in that? Yeah, Chad Michael Murray, I think that's the one. There's a few Chad Michaels, right? But I think it's Chad Michael Murray and Jesse Metcalf. But then Shepherd Code has a brief appearance by Don the Dragon Wilson. So he's in there. Also, our spotlight on a fight for that episode, we look at Black Belt. So that's a fun one there as well. And then, week after, in 2 weeks, Mitch from Video Vacuum is back on. We're going to be looking at the new Dolph film, Wanted Man. So it's another fun conversation there. Always great time to have. Always great having Mitch on as well. In terms of DTVC Extra, no episode this week, but next week, next Thursday, we will be looking at the first two Ip Man films. So Ip Man and then Ip Man 2 with Donnie Yen. They're still on Tubi, so fingers crossed that we'll still be able to make those ones happen. And then in terms of the site, still no word on The Gardener. So we'll be looking at this weekend. I think it's going to be Frankenhooker, which previously done an episode with Fred the Wolf from Full Moon Reviews. So that was a fun conversation. You can go back in the archives and check that out. But finally reviewing Frankenhooker on the site. And then Crackerjack 2, another one we're finally reviewing, which I did in a previous episode with Todd Liebenow from Forgotten Filmcast. So that's coming up in terms of the blog goes. And then, in terms of guests episodes that I've been on, my episode that I did with After Movie Diner with John Cross, we did Sleazy Spader Springtime. We looked at a movie called Critical Care, that a Sidney Lumet film with Spader, Helen Mirren, all kinds of great people in the cast, Kira Sedgwick. So we looked at that film. A really fun conversation. So you can go to After Movie Diner. You should already be subscribed there, but if you're not, go check that out. Listen to us go on about Mr. Spader there. But definitely a fun time there. And then a future episode of Forgotten Filmcast I recorded with Todd Liebenow. I don't know when the episode's going to drop, but we looked at the 1981 film King of the Mountain, which has Harry Hamlin, Dennis Hopper, Deborah Van Valkenburg, which people know probably from obviously from Streets of Fire or The Warriors, but then also Albert Pyun's Mean Guns. So that keep an eye out for that one. If you're not subscribed to Forgotten Filmcast, you definitely should be as well there. And keep an eye out there for when that one will be on. I think that gets us over the top with everything. So one of the things, we are looking at the fact that I'm doing weekly episodes, and I was looking at maybe potentially, just because I've got some stuff going on in August, that there might be a week in August that I take off. So we'll kind of keep going with those weekly episodes that we've been doing so far. I mean, so far since February, we've been managing to keep to it. So, but I don't know if it's the same. If I say I'm going to take a week off, it's a little different than if I actually just everybody's expecting a podcast and they don't get anything, right? That's kind of the thing I've been trying to avoid is that situation where, it happened with the blog earlier this year, right? Where I was away and didn't get a blog post up in time. Or I didn't while I was away. And so everybody's expecting a blog post but didn't get one. So, hopefully I'll be able to give a heads up if we do skip an episode, a week in August. But so far, we're good to go at least through the beginning of August with people scheduled to record. So we'll see what happens. All right. Before we get into the episode here, why don't we do my initial thought segment here? So my initial thought segment this week, I'm going to talk about CGI, because obviously CGI is a big thing. And of course, now with AI, it's even a bigger thing, right? Because AI is sort of informing, CGI and in terms of how it's being used in movies and in the ways that people can even produce CGIs for movies. And I think there's sort of two schools of thought. One is, okay, it should always be practical effects are always better than CGI, right? And I kind of get where that comes from. I think there are other times, of course, where it's like, no, if we're doing a Marvel movie or a superhero movie, it's better to do CGI because you can make it look more realistic, right? There's that part of it as well. Where I come down on this is that I think there are certain times where you just really need to use CGI. I think the number one for me is when it comes to animals, like big animals in a movie. There should never be another tiger in a film. There should never be another lion or a bear or an elephant or anything like that. Leave those poor animals alone. Let them just go be big animals where they are, in the jungle or in the desert or wherever they live, in the forest. Let them go do that. There should not be any bear wranglers on set. There should be no tiger wranglers. I think of that movie, The Hangover, right, where they have the tiger, right? Like they go to see Mike Tyson and they find his big tiger, and it's actually the tiger there. That should always be a CGI tiger from now on, right? Leave those big animals alone. I think primates. We shouldn't have primates in movies anymore. I don't need a chimp in a movie. I can have a CGI chimp. Humans and chimps, I think we share like 97% of our DNA, which I don't think that should be a rule for why we should treat animals better or worse as of how much DNA they share with us. But what I'm saying is like they don't, there's this cute idea of them as like they're like small, like a cross between like a small person and a pet, and that's how we treat them, and we put them in movies and stuff like that. No, leave them alone. We can CGI a chimpanzee all we want. Kangaroos, right? We can do all kinds of CGI kangaroos that we need to. If somebody's riding an elephant, you can do that. If Lucas can have people riding all kinds of crazy animals and make it look right, we can have a CGIs of people riding elephants. We don't need to actually ride an elephant. Leave the elephants alone. So that's my first big one. I think safety is a big one as well, and I think that's one where we start to get to I don't say a gray area, but obviously we don't want people getting hurt on set, right? We don't want people getting hurt, period. But you think of like the two Roadhouse movies, like the new one that's using CGIs all over the place and using this kind of AI technology, and it's using this technology that kind of sort of mimics punching when it really isn't, that kind of thing, versus the original Roadhouse, where Patrick Swayze was so injured from doing his fight scenes with Marshall Teague that like he had knee problems and couldn't do the Predator. He was offered Predator 2, he couldn't do it because of his knee, the injuries that he sustained on his knee shooting those fight scenes in Roadhouse, and ended up doing Ghost instead. So it's like, okay, which would I rather have? Because the fights look better in Roadhouse, right? But do I want actors injuring their knees? So it's a unique one there. You think of Spiro Rosatos, right? You think of those PM Entertainment flicks. When he's shooting a real car up in the air and it's like launching and it's smashing into light poles and traffic lights and things like that, it looks fantastic when it's real. It looks better when it's real than it does as CGI. But not everybody's Spiro Rosatos, right? Not everybody can pull that off. And so there is that element as well there too. And so I think if it's a more amateur production and they don't have the safety, they have the ability to do this kind of thing safely, I think CGI is definitely a way to go there. But I also agree that it looks so much better when it's not CGI. So I totally get why people wouldn't want it. I can't watch a PM flick and say like, oh yeah, that would have been better if they'd done CGI for that, right? I definitely can't. It looks better there. So I think it's a gray area when it comes to safety, which safety shouldn't be a gray area. I think it's more of like if they can pull these stunts off without injuring anybody, and they know that like there's a pretty high degree of certainty that nobody's going to be injured, I think it's better to do it practically than it is to use CGI for it. I think if you don't have the budget for that kind of thing, if you can't afford the ability to have somebody on fire, just use CGI flames. And I get it; it doesn't look as good, but I'd rather that everybody be safe than somebody get hurt. So that's my take on that one there. Along the same lines, think of the budget. I think there are budgetary reasons why you need to use CGI. I think I know the movie Renegades, which I really enjoyed. That was written by Tom Jolliffe, directed by the late Daniel Zarrilli, released by Shogun Films. They had a mansion that they were using that they couldn't really shoot it up. Or they had locations that they couldn't really shoot up. So they had to use CGI effects to mimic that because they couldn't afford to blow up everything in the location. I think if you... if that's the difference between us getting a movie or not getting a movie, and I think in their case, what they do right to make it better without the CGI is, with the CGI effects, is they've got a really great cast. It's really invested, and that helps as well there. But yeah, I think if from a budget standpoint, I mean, especially nowadays, and I guess this is the thing, right? Is that there's just not a lot of money in making movies as much as there used to be, right? If you make an action movie and you put it on like Tubi or something, you're not going to make a lot back. And so, yeah, you got to figure out where you can cut costs. And it's like, okay, well, I get Eric Roberts for a day. If that means I can't shoot up this location that I've got here because I can't afford to pay for all the damages, then yeah, I'm going to take Eric Roberts. And so I don't know what the right decision is there either. I think it's more of a gray area than we think, but yes, the movie's going to look better with practical effects. I think of a movie like Craving that I reviewed as a Jay Horton film, horror movie that was all practical effects. And in that case, I mean, it looked fantastic. But again, the practical effects that he's able to do, they're a little different than, like, say, Spiro Rosato's launching a car, over something. So that's, I mean, with horror, I think practical effects mean a lot more than with action movies. But yes, obviously, I would much rather have, I'd much rather have the actual thing. So I guess, kind of bottom line on this, I think number one, again, just get these animals out of movies. I mean, if you ask me, like, what would be the animals that I would want in a movie, I mean, a horse maybe. But even with horses, it's like, I mean, if you can CGI the horse, it's also safer for the actors involved, right? They don't have to worry about the horse bucking them or knocking them off. The person doesn't have to learn how to ride a horse, right? They can just sit on some kind of thing in front of a green screen, and then you get the horse in front. But then again, the horse isn't subjected to things like loud noises on the set, all of those kinds of things. People like to ride horses. You ride them, and I'm not one to talk because I bet on horses if I go to the casino. So I'm obviously contributing to something that's not good in terms of exploitation of animals. I'm just saying, like, yeah, horses. Yes, you'd probably say you should have horses on set, but then there's another part of me that's like, if you can do it with CGI, maybe that's a better way to go. Cats and dogs, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, we think of cats and dogs as being, like, so used to being around people, and they're kind of malleable, and they can, we can put them on sets and stuff like that. But again, the loud noises, I mean, I see our cats, and when we had our dog here with the fireworks, right? People light off fireworks, and actually they weren't so bad this year in Philadelphia, which is actually pretty nice. There weren't people in the streets. I think they all went down to the shore and lit the fireworks there. But they don't like those loud noises, and so I think also too, you don't have to train a cat that's a CGI cat, right? If you get a CGI cat in a movie, you don't have to do anything with them. And maybe you have a couple establishing shots of a real cat, and then you do the CGI stuff. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with getting animals out of movies if we can. I think that's something that I'm fine with. The other ones, again, I think it's like, maybe I don't think there's a blanket rule for it, but I think yes, practical effects look better. Again, except for when it's big animals. I don't think a real live tiger looks better than a CGI tiger, to be honest, because I'm looking at them like, that poor tiger, like, people are giving this poor tiger a hard time to put them in a movie. Leave the tiger alone. So maybe that'll be the thing to end it on, right? Leave those tigers alone, right? Just let them do their own thing and be tigers. But yeah, why don't we wrap up that initial thought here, and we'll have John from After Movie Diner playing our theme song, and then when we come back, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast On, we're going to be looking at Electric Boogaloo, the wild story of Canon Films. All right, we are back, and I'm joined once again by Sean Malloy from I Must Break This Podcast. Welcome back, Sean.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I've really been looking forward to discussing this one. I unabashedly love this documentary, so we're gonna have fun with this one.
Yeah, it was great. It was great when you mentioned it, because yeah, essentially, like, since I came back from hiatus in like late 2019, around that time, I started this like unofficial tradition of doing a documentary at Christmas, and then it was like, oh, it's July. maybe I'll do Christmas and documentary for Christmas in July as well. And so I had watched this movie, and you saw it, and you were like, oh, that sounds interesting. Why don't I, would you want to do a podcast episode on it? I was like, yeah, that sounds fantastic. So so here we are, and I mean, the movie we're going to be talking about is Electric Boogaloo. And let me get the full title here, because it's one of those big documentary titles. But Electric Boogaloo: The Wild Untold Story of Canon Films.
Yes, and we should also say actually that there is another documentary about Canon Films called The Go-Go Boys. The Go-Go Boys. Sorry, I said that wrong. And that one puts Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus in a little bit more of a favorable light, I will say, with that one. And also, interestingly, that one was able to get Jean-Claude Van Damme interviewed, which is interesting. Electric Boogaloo did not, but it's just really kind of interesting that there's two documentaries. I think Electric Boogaloo is so much better, is so much more fun. The Go-Go Boys really just kind of praises Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus as being the producers that they were, which is fine. I mean, those two guys from Israel, those were cousins from Israel, we should say. They had a passion for cinema. My God, they loved movies, and so that one, the Go-Go Boys, that one pretty much is more kind of like a love letter to them and their passion. And like I said, it's not as fun as Electric Boogaloo. Electric Boogaloo is just so well done and so well put together. I've come back to this documentary, Matt. I kid you not. I mean, I love documentaries as is, but I have come back to this documentary. Oh my gosh, this is sad to admit, but I'd say almost a dozen times, maybe. I mean, it's one that I come back to every year, because there's just so much fun, and hearing about all the little movies that they pick apart in the film, it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And there's, I mean, you mentioned, right, that Van Damme's in the other one, but he's not in this one. I mean, this one you get, just from, my own site standpoint, obviously Golan Globus and Canon are in the Hall of Fame, but we also get Dolph and, Dolph and Michael Dudikoff in there. They are Hall of Famers. We get two directors. We get Albert Pyun, and we get... who's the other one? Sam Furstenberg. So we get a lot of really great names in there too, which is really cool. And it's just, tons of the stories are fantastic.
Exactly. I mean, the great thing about this one is, I mean, I think anybody who has seen, I mean, I'll just first of all say, I think movies about the making of movies, especially the making of troubled movies, are tons of fun to watch as is. You know what I mean? I know I've mentioned it on my show multiple times, but I'm a huge fan of Ed Wood with Johnny Depp. I think Ed Wood is a lot of fun. The Disaster Artist, about the making of The Room, the one that was written and directed and starring James Franco. I think that one has a lot of fun with it, because, I mean, I think at the end of the day, no matter how low budget or cheap or terrible a movie may come out to be, I think it's important to recognize just how difficult it is to get a movie made. I mean, I'm not in the movie business, but I can certainly recognize the fact that there are, hundreds upon hundreds of people who are, spending countless hours trying to put together a film and make it look as polished and as good as they possibly can. And with the films that came out of Canon, I think we can say, I mean, not a lot of them were really very good. Okay, they put out a lot of crap, but I don't think the filmmakers were intending to make shit. I mean, I think that's very clear from this particular documentary and all the various talking heads. I think everybody who is interviewed here will admit that, like, everybody was trying. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, everybody was trying, and what we got may not have been amazing, but I mean, there's certainly a lot of effort with each of these films, which I think is pretty charming to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, not even that they were trying, right? It was that, like, they thought each one was going to be the one that was the hit that was going to pay for the other ones. And it was almost like they were chasing it, that, like, when one failed, they were making another one to make money back for the previous one. So, they had, like, high hopes for all of these movies. And it's amazing, think of the different stories and the different ones that come up in this, where it's like, they're making a film with Jean-Luc Godard, which I've seen, the King Lear movie. And, I mean, Godard is just ridiculous to make a movie with, as it is. And, the Golden Globus guys just thought, hey, we've got Godard, this is going to be great, and then they realized like, oh no, this is Godard, like he's not easy to work with, and so it was another one, it was like a failed one that they had to decide to recoup their money somewhere else. That was a great story. The other thing I loved was, as you're watching the documentary, they talk about how they kind of, from an action standpoint, right, they have their two big stars of Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson, and David Del Valle, who actually has a really great Instagram, Del Valle Archives, and so we're mutual followers on Instagram, and he posts some really great stuff. Recently, he posted meeting Udo Kier in Palm Springs, but he's in the documentary because he was a script reader for Cannon, and he talked about how he had two piles. He had the Chuck Norris pile and the Charles Bronson pile, and when scripts came in, it was like they went in one pile or the other one.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and we look at that today, and we look at that as being pretty silly. You know what I mean? But I mean, you said a lot there. But I mean, it's really kind of interesting how they were essentially, in a lot of ways, kind of running the Hollywood version of a Ponzi scheme. Right? You know what I mean? Like they have to pay off this film. Well, okay, in order to pay off that film, well, we're going to make another film, and hopefully that'll pay off these previous two films. I mean, and you look at it today, and it's like, wow, that is not the way to run business, okay, at all. But I mean, what's interesting is the typical movie studio puts out, on average, what? How many films would you say a year? I'm thinking like Warner Brothers. Okay, yeah. Warner Brothers over the past 6 months has put out, what, maybe 3 or 4 films? I'd have to go back and look.
Well, it's even less now. That's like one of the interesting things is that with the current industry, all of them are putting out, like, it used to be, right, that you'd put out, like, I think, like, if you put out 10 movies and you had 5 of them that 3 or 4 of them made your the top 10 movies of the year or something like that, and now it's almost like you put all your eggs in a few baskets, it seems like, with the studios now. So it's even less than that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and to give them credit, I mean, it's you look at Canon nowadays, and you can't help but say that name and kind of grimace and laugh, because I mean, yes, I mean the ninja movies that they did, the slew of the ninja movies, and the various dance movies they did the break-in movies and the salsa movies. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of garbage that came out of them. I mean, but they also put out some fairly prestigious stuff. I mean, what's his face? Zeffirelli did a film with them. Runaway Train with John Voight and Eric Roberts. I mean, that movie is amazing, from not just from a technical standpoint, but also from an acting standpoint. But what's really unfortunate about them is I don't think they didn't get the respect in Hollywood, especially from the major players like Universal and Warner Brothers and all that. And I think for a couple of reasons. Number one, they were transplants from Israel, and so I don't think yes, they were movie lovers, obviously. I mean, they were fans, but I don't think they really knew the American market and what like American audiences really wanted. I mean, yes, they did tap into the Chuck Norris zeitgeist, so they did get that going. Ninjas, obviously, but I mean, so many of those films were bizarre that it's kind of like, did they really think that they'd be taken seriously? I mean, you have Runaway Train, like I said, which is a really prestigious, polished film. But then sandwiched around that, you have, Ninja 3, The Domination, Bolero, which is like practically, I mean, let's be honest, that was like a couple notches away from being pornography. And then Invaders from Mars by Tobe Hooper. You know what I mean? So it's like, why would Runaway Train be taken seriously when when a few months prior they had a film about arm wrestling come out? You know what I mean? So I can't really blame people for turning their nose up at them. You know what I mean?
No, and the other thing too, when you think about the whole blockbuster system at that time, you're talking about movies that like Spielberg was doing, Lucas were doing, and they were almost, I don't want to say they were elevated versions of blockbusters, but they kind of, there was something a little bit better than just like kind of crass, like, thrown out there. And it was almost like Golden Globus, like they were trying to replicate what Spielberg and Lucas were doing. But like you said, there's something culturally off that they just didn't quite understand it.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I guess if you go to the early days, okay, they did a teen sex comedy
Right.
called the Last American Virgin. So that's at the kind of the beginning of the documentary. Because the wonderful thing about the documentary is it really does chart their meteoric rise to their end. And oh boy, but when it gets to their end, when Canon was on its last legs, oh my God, did they have a miraculous fall? I mean, man, you look at the final films that they were putting out, and it's really sad. But I mean, at the beginning when they first started, I mean, you look at a film like The Last American Virgin, which on its on paper, okay, that's a decent idea because teen sex comedies were in. I believe that came out off the heels of Porky's, right? So I mean, it had the ingredients there to be a relative hit, but I mean it has an ending that is an ultimate downer. You know what I mean? It's just like the ultimate sucker punch of an ending. I mean, and it handles serious themes. Okay, that I mean, you could argue and you could say, well, wait a minute, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that's a teen sex comedy, but that also handled a lot of the same themes that Last American Virgin does. However, how do I say this? Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a film that was made by Americans, but you know what I mean, who kind of had a better understanding of kind of what American audiences want and were expecting. You know what I mean? Whereas Last American Virgin is not that. You know what I mean? It's my understanding it was basically it was the American remake of a film in Israel called Lemon Popsicle, and so they brought it over, and you can just imagine. I mean, and I think that's if Matt, if you and I went to another country and tried making a movie without fully understanding the culture and the sensibilities, it's kind of setting us up for failure too, to an extent.
Right. Well, because what's interesting, right? Because we've kind of seen the gamut where, like you take someone like an Amir Shervan from Iran, and he's a much more extreme case of this, right? When you see like Samurai Cop or Young Rebels, those movies that he made, that's like us being reflected back at ourselves in a way that like makes almost makes no sense, right? That it's just so completely. It's just so goofy and ridiculous. But then when you really drill down on it, it's like, no, this was Amir Shervan trying to make American action movies based on what he thought Americans liked. And it's just sort of these extreme elements of it. Godfrey Ho's another one, right? Godfrey Ho is like, oh, well, Americans like Garfield, so I'm going to have Richard Harrison talking on a Garfield phone in my ninja movie, where with my ninjas that all have ninja written on, and all that kind of stuff. And so with Golan Globus, right, because I guess with Israel's being, it's a little bit more European and a little bit closer to Western. It's more of a Western concept. So they were a little bit closer to what we were. So it's like almost like you said, like you almost have to, you almost miss it, or you have to dig a little bit more to see it. That they were a little bit culturally off. But like you said, Last American Virgin, it stands out with those the kind of those misses culturally there.
And that's the thing. I think that's. I mean, there are a variety of things that kind of that we can chart and look at as being the nail in the coffin for canon. You know what I mean? There's multiple things that we can look at and say, well, this is what this is where they zigged when they should have zagged, or whatever it may be. But I think one of the big things is they were putting out so much content. Yeah. Okay, they were putting out so much content that they spread themselves so thin that they didn't have. And this was, I mean, you could say this was maybe toward the tail end of their prime when they were, when they were no longer at the height of their powers. But I mean, they were putting out so much content that they really didn't have a heck of a lot of money to really fully invest in one particular production and give it their all. And I think the other issue with them too, to be perfectly honest too, is they were tackling way too many genres. Okay, you know what I mean? They're tackling, they're doing a dopey sex comedy. They're doing dance films. They're doing martial arts movies. They're doing trashy horror movies. They're doing revenge thrillers. They're doing they tried doing a romantic comedy, the one with Elliot Gould and
Right.
Mariel Hemingway. You know what I mean? What was that called? Over the Brooklyn Bridge or Over the Bridge?
I think yes.
Yeah. And so they're doing all these various genres, and I think. I mean, the best studio that I kind of like to compare canon with nowadays is someone like Lionsgate.
Yeah.
Okay, because if you look at Lionsgate, I mean, it's really kind of amazing. If you had told me back in 2002, 2003 that Lionsgate was going to be running with the big dogs like Universal, Warner Brothers, okay, would be actually doing better and more financially successful than Paramount, I would have said you were crazy. Because if you think about it, when they first started, they were doing a lot of, kind of exploitation type horror movies, things of that nature. To an extent, to be honest, that's kind of what they're doing nowadays still, okay? And I often wonder if Canon had stuck with that and made that solely their bread and butter, maybe they might still be around. I mean, if you think about it, the video label Full Moon Pictures. Have you ever heard of Full Moon Pictures?
Yes, yeah, with that. I can't think of his name. There's the guy that's it's like I can't believe I'm drawing a blank. I want to say it's like David something who runs Full Moon. That's so horrible.
Is it Charles Band?
Charles Band. Yeah. Why did I think David? I think I follow him on Twitter. I see him post stuff about Full Moon on Twitter like all the time, and I'm like liking it and stuff, and it's just like completely goes out of my head. But I know exactly what you mean in terms of that studio.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think about it, I mean, look, they have been around since the early days of the VHS rental market, and they're still thriving. And I think one of the big reasons for that is because they work in a very specific niche. Yeah. They don't take themselves too seriously. They don't spread themselves they don't spread themselves too thin. They only have they have the number of projects that they can handle at one particular time, and then they know how to cater and market to that particular fan base. And I often wonder if Canon had thought maybe more in those realms, instead of deciding, hey, we need to get the biggest stars, pay the stars the biggest salaries, and put out these particular films that really don't cater to you know what I mean, that really aren't like mainstream type properties, then maybe they might have been around a little bit longer. I don't know.
No, it's a great point, because it's like they really. Yeah, it's like you said, like they kind of just went for it, right, in a lot of ways, and
they did.
Yeah, and like one of the interesting things, like when you talk about that, because with Lionsgate, right, one of the things you can think about with Lionsgate is I think, right, they did the John Wick movies, and one of the things with the John Wick movies that you notice that with each successive film, they only get slightly bigger from a budgetary standpoint. So it's not like they're like, okay, let's just keep jumping up, suddenly like doing a half of, 250 million or something like that with they kind of like, okay, we did this much money for this one, we're going to put this much into the next one, and then and each successive Lionsgate, like each successive John Wick movie made 4 times its budget roughly each time. So it's like it always made a good amount of money. And I think Canon would have played it on a completely different mode, right? They would have been like, let's put everything into this first John Wick movie and see what happens, right? And that first John Wick movie probably makes the same amount of money whether you put all this money into it or you do like Lionsgate does and put like just enough into it that like to make it a solid picture. But I think that was the thing, like you said, like Lionsgate is going to put what they think is a good number in to start with, as opposed to putting all their chips into that one, and then of course put all your chips into the next one and hope it pays for the money you lost in the previous one.
Oh, exactly. I mean, look at Lionsgate when they first started out. Okay, I mean, they were doing junk like House of the Dead. Right. You know what I mean? And I mean, and Alone in the Dark. And I mean, these films that just were not. I mean, even the very first Punisher movie is really kind of small scale. And they were playing their cards fairly close. They also had the direct-to-video market that they were really, really capitalized on. I think that's kind of what in the end kind of helped them. But then they would find one prestigious project every now and again that they thought, okay, this might be a bit of a risk, a bit of a gamble, but you know what I mean, we're not gonna spend a heck of a lot. So I mean, I think with them they did the film Crash back in 2005, and that's kind of what really helped them become, okay, wait a minute, this is not just an exploitation studio. I mean, but with Canon, man, I mean, it was interesting. I mentioned Sylvester Stallone, but I mean, they were throwing all this money at big name celebrities, you know what I mean? And they were also getting directors like Tobe Hooper. And that's the cool thing about the documentary about Electric Boogaloo, is how none of the directors really speak badly about them. I mean, excuse me, they talk about them as being, fairly inept with their business decisions right. and whatnot. But it's not like they hated working for them. That's kind of the beauty about the documentary. I don't think anybody in the film talks about them as being terrible bosses. Okay, I know Tobe Hooper, when they hired him, they pretty much gave him carte blanche to make the movies that he wanted to make. Okay, it was the same thing with Zeffirelli. Sylvester Stallone, he was at the height of his powers around this time. He was the biggest star in the world. They were able to get him, you know what I mean? And yeah, I mean, now that we're talking about this, but I mean, Carl Coe, okay, they kind of came out near the late 80s and kind of fizzled, but they had a similar strategy where they were putting together these huge, big budget action movies that were fairly successful, but it's interesting, they were spending so much money, you know what I mean, and putting so much into these productions that, I mean, for example, Cutthroat Island was like the film that pretty much bankrupted the studio, and you look at it and it's like, did they really think that a movie about pirates in 1995 was really the safest, investment? It's similar with Cannon. Did they really think that a Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel that was being played as an overt comedy was really going to get them out of bankruptcy? Did they really think that a film with Sylvester Stallone, who was hot off of Rocky and Rambo, but it's a child custody drama where he's competing in arm wrestling? Did they really think that that was the best move? But again, you had these guys who just loved movies and really had no idea about the market and what American audiences wanted.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, and also too, it is interesting when you look at the '80s at the time, because you mentioned Carol Coe. I mean, you think of United Artists was still big at that time. They hadn't been bought up by MGM yet. Orion, in the later part of the decade, they have movies that are that I think win, not like Platoon. I think was an Orion film that won Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a Woody Allen, was it Hannah and Her Sisters? I think was also Orion. And then of course RoboCop was Orion. So I mean, but then they end up going bankrupt themselves. It was like it is interesting in a way that you think like Canon, there's this bright star that like bursts and kind of just withers away. It probably would have been tough as they got into the 90s for them to survive anyway. But like you said, when they crash spectacularly. And so I'm trying to think of like where a good place, like one of the things I think when they look at the beginning of Canon, kind of where it starts, where Golan and Globus are in Israel making films, and they make Lemon Popsicle, and they start to get dream big, and have those ideas. One of the interesting things that they talk about with Menachem Golan is this idea of the sabra, which is it's a plant in Israel that's like a cactus, or it's like a very prickly, spiny plant that's like known for being very tough, and nobody wants to deal with it. So think of like politicians. Itzhak Rabin was known for his sabra, and that was kind of, and in a way, it's we think of all the stuff that's happening in Israel and in Palestine now, that like Yitzhak Rabin was kind of trying to move to more of a détente at that time, and then he gets assassinated by hardline. Like I don't know if Zionist is the right term, but it was the hardline Israeli group that assassinated him, and his legacy, Netanyahu takes over from there. But he was one of those ones that was like, when he would go into a room, he was not taking no for an answer. And so it was like, no, we're going to do this, whatever it is. And so like, for example, when they wanted to remove the Israeli settlements from the Sinai Peninsula after the Camp David Accords. And he was just like, yeah, they're going. We're bulldozing them. We're getting rid of them. And Golan has that similar Sabra approach, right? That's like, I'm going to sit in the screening room and I'm going to tell you exactly how I think this movie should go. And I don't care, And like you were saying, like some directors, right, they had carte blanche. But other directors, right, he was like, no, you need to add this, or you need to put this in there, or you need to do something
Sure.
else with it. And like they said, but even I think for the ones that he gave carte blanche to, there was this sense of like, well, we got to get this movie done at this time, or we need to be done this soon, or we need to those kinds of things. And I think it was that Sabra approach of like, I'm just gonna push through and not take no for an answer, and I'm gonna just by the strength of my will and my stubbornness, I'm gonna make this work. And it worked for him in Israel. And then he got to America, and what's fascinating, I think, is that I think that Sabra will is what got us the films that we even got, right? Got us this whole thing that we even got. So it's like we wouldn't have had anything if he hadn't had that Sabra will. But then, of course, that's also what causes the downfall, right? Is that he also can't see it ending, like when he's starting to make the bad decisions, because he's so stubborn that it doesn't matter if it's a good or a bad decision, he's going to make the decision.
Yeah, and I mean, and to be honest, I miss the days of I miss the days. How do I say this? That we had a Wild West studio who, kind of played by their own rules and put out films that didn't cater to the general masses. And we really don't have a studio like that today. Now, granted, I mentioned Full Moon Studios, which is still going, but I mean, look, that's a direct to video thing. You know what I mean? That's a direct to streaming thing. So I don't know if I really want to consider that or count that. Lionsgate is still around, but Lionsgate has really been playing it safe these past few years. Okay, obviously they have John Wick, and then the Saw films, but you really don't see too much of them. They're kind of playing their cards pretty close. Which I completely understand in this market. Why would you bank on something that's not a surefire bet? Okay, but I do miss the days of when we had the video rental stores. Okay, and even with these rental stores, we still had films that came to films that came to theaters, fronted by studios, that you wouldn't see films like that today go theatrical. At best they would go to a streaming service and then would be forgotten about. But obviously there was Canon. I've long said, but I've said this, I think, maybe on my show multiple times, but I miss New Line Cinema like you wouldn't believe. I feel like New Line Cinema, just all of the films that came out of New Line Cinema, I'm sure you remember them. I mean, but all of their films had, it's almost like everything kind of existed in that same world. It feels like everything that came out of them was kind of like a shared cinematic universe, and everything you could very tell that it wasn't a mainstream studio, but that still was released in theaters alongside the stuff from Warner Brothers and Paramount and whatnot. But if you just look at the type of films that came out of New Line, we had Spawn, we had Mortal Kombat, we had the Ninja Turtle movies, Surviving the Game, which is amazing. Okay, I'm trying to think what else. They did the Friday films with Ice Cube, which at the time were a fairly risky gamble. And then occasionally they would do something that was pretty hard hitting, like American History X. You know what I mean? And I just miss that, because I feel like everything that came from New Line Cinema all had, you know what I'm saying? How it feels like it kind of came out of the same universe, but it was all so unique. We don't get that nowadays. Okay, if you open up you go to the local theater, you're guaranteed to have something by Disney, some other animated picture by some other random studio, and some other big budget thing like Godzilla or whatever that comes from Warner. But the kind of bizarre, quirky, film like that. I miss that, man, and I feel like Canon was kind of the what's the correct word to say, but they were kind of the progenitor for what we got for studios like New Line.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I think they showed studios like New Line that there's a market for it, that there's a place for it, and I think that for me, growing up, like you said, with the video store. And you wouldn't necessarily see all these movies in the theater, but they were in the theater, like for people that wanted to see them. And I think the other thing too, the other point you make that it's a great one is, there's consolidation in the industry, right? So there aren't as many distributors now. It's like when you look at the 80s, you look at like top 10 grossing films from the 80s, yes, you still see the big names, right? So you see Paramount, it's Columbia then, not Sony now, but you'll see 20th Century Fox or whatever, but it's like, it's some of the same names, but then it's also all of these other names like you say, like a Canon. Like a Canon wouldn't have made a top 10 picture of that, but you get names like Orion, or something like that, United Artists. But even like within what was in the theater, like you'd get all kinds, like you said, like a New Line would be in the theater. Carol Co would have movies that were in the theater, and so you could go to the theater and see films from a lot of different distributors. Now there's like the combination of consolidation of the theater industry, right? Like a lot of the indie theaters were bought out or run out of business by the big names. But then with the consolidation within the distributors, like you said, Disney's going to put out a movie a year. Like for example, Disney, they own so much, right? That it's like they had this ability to put a stranglehold in the theater because they could put out a Marvel movie, a Star Wars movie, a Pixar movie, and then their own Disney movie, and just completely flood the theaters with these movies, right? Just have like 2 or 3 screens for each one, and you know, if you're, you know, say Warner, and you want to put out a DC movie, you might not get as many screens as you want. Or if you're, you know, Universal and you're putting out a Fast and Furious movie, you don't get as many screens as you're expecting. But what's happened now is that because now they're cutting back their amount of product. Now it's like, well, we got one movie from Disney this year, I think, right? And it's just that Deadpool and Wolverine movie. I think maybe they did an animated film or something like that. So now it's like there's almost nothing in the theater, right? And it's like you got this Furiosa movie that is doing pretty poorly, not doing as well as it wanted to, or The Fall Guy. But it used to be when movies like this were out in the theater, there was almost like a momentum that the movie theater generated on its own, where like maybe you go see, you know, in the late 80s, maybe you go see like, I don't know, you know, Terminator, or I'm trying to think of like a late 80s, you know, like a real popular one from that time, you know, like one of the later, you know, Star Trek movies or something like that. And you enjoy it so much, you're like, okay, I'm going to go to the theater to see something else. I want to keep going to the theater, you know, and you keep going back and you catch as many movies as you can. Nowadays, because there's so few options in the theater, it's actually, there isn't that momentum. The momentum comes with streaming now, which, to your point,
which
I think,
there's no money in.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you, but there's no money in that. I mean, and I could be completely wrong with this, but I think one of the other things that also kind of hurt Canon to an extent was the fact that, I mean, if you really think about it, okay, we had video rental stores, okay, started in the late 70s, early 80s, but they really didn't become commonplace until, I'd say, toward the later end of the 80s and definitely into the 90s, okay? So a studio like New Line Cinema, okay, which all of their films that they had put out, okay, throughout the 90s were not massive hits by any means, but studios like that, films like that, can almost bank on the video store. Okay, they can almost bank on the rental to kind of help get them that money back, right? But with Canon, what's you know really unfortunate with them is they started petering out toward the late 80s, early 90s. They put out a few films in that early 90s period, but they really didn't have a heck of a lot to really you know, ride on the coattails of the video store. So what's unfortunate about them is they really, again, they rose to fame, but they kind of were on their fumes in that late 80s period when video rental stores were not as commonplace as they became in the 1990s. You know what I'm saying? And so I just kind of wonder if films like Ninja 3 to the Domination and Last American Virgin, or whatever it may be, if those had come out later on, if maybe they might have had a longer run. I don't know, but they still had a good run of about 15 years. That's nothing to scoff at, I guess, right?
Well, 15 years, considering when you look at the output and like just how crazy they were and how much they were working on credit and loans and just, you know, going to con and just like selling the ideas of things to pay for other things. The fact that they worked on that model and survived for 15 years is absolutely amazing. And, you know, one other thing to your point too about the video store era. You know, I think the video store era kind of one way that you could there has a bit of a comp to the streaming era is that, you know, I think a movie like Superman 4 is the kind of thing that if it was made today, right? So if a studio decided to pick up Superman and they made Superman 4, it would be like Madam Web, right? Where Madam Web was completely panned, you know, did poorly in the box office, but now has this like second almost cult like life on Netflix where it's doing really well on there. And I almost feel like Superman 4, I think, is the kind of thing that would have done well, like in that kind of environment of like, you know, maybe nobody sees it in the theater, but yeah, let's rent that Superman 4. Oh, this is ridiculous. Let's, you know, and that's the kind of thing I think, to your point, that they would have missed. Like Ninja 3 Domination is another movie like that I think would have been like kind of more of a cult classic that people watched at home. That yeah, they like you said, they kind of peter out before that video store era, and also like the HBO Cinemax, like that era where it was like enough people had HBO that it could be that kind of lucrative thing.
Right. You know, going to the documentary, I have to ask, because I have my own personal takes, but your favorite interviews in the documentary, which I mean, because man, this documentary is comprehensive. They interview everyone from the directors to the writers to the editors, music supervisors, actors, you name it. I mean, everybody that Mark Hartley, which we haven't said that the director of this film, but it's Mark Hartley.
Right.
He just pulled out everything that he possibly could to get all of these. But I guess all of the interviews, which ones did you like the most?
Wow. So I mean, yeah. So the David Del Val ones were a trip, just because again, following him on Instagram and seeing him and then being like, oh, he was a part of this, and the way that he, as someone who was, again, he was a script reader, so he wouldn't, he was kind of like in that kind of just in amongst it all, right? So he was really just experiencing it from that person who's like, just like, yeah, throw these scripts in this pile, or give us movies like this or something like that. So that was one that I really liked. Molly Ringwald being interviewed about the King Lear movie, the Godard King Lear movie, because I've seen that movie. I saw it a while back. It is a trip. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense, and it's exactly what a Godard would do to two unsuspecting producers of a distribution company like Golan and Globus, who don't know what they're getting into when they make a movie with Godard. It's exactly that movie. So I like that. I mean, the Pyun interviews. I love the Pyun interviews. And I think the Dudikoff interviews, because he comes in and he's very candid about what his experience was. It's not negative, it's positive, but kind of just almost like a seat of the pants kind of thing, where they were just like, suddenly they had made him almost like a third star, right? Between, you had Chuck Norris and Charles Bronson, so suddenly it's like, oh, we're going to make this Dudikoff guy a star too. And so I enjoyed those interviews as well. The one I was disappointed in was Dolph. I wish there was more Dolph in there, but yeah. How about you? Which ones were you a fan of?
Well, I mean, real quick regarding Dudikoff, there is a part of me that I'd love to live in an alternate reality where we got to see the canon film directed by Joseph Zito and starring Michael Dudikoff as Spider-Man, because I don't know if you've seen any of the deleted scenes, but there are some deleted scenes that were not included in the final cut. You can find them on YouTube, where they did have the rights for a period to a Spider-Man film that was going to be directed by Joseph Zito, who directed like Invasion USA and Red Scorpion, and then Michael Dudikoff was being courted to play Peter Parker and Spider-Man, which, I mean, considering he had come, I mean, would he have been the best choice? Absolutely not. But I mean, considering where we were, it kind of makes sense around that period.
Right. Well, and the funny thing is, so Albert Pyun mentioned this to me because he was tapped to take over the project when Zito dropped out, because Zito didn't like that the budget was cut. And so when Pyun took over, he was like, yeah, they wanted us to use wires for Spider-Man. And he was like, remember when there was the Broadway show, the Spider-Man Broadway show that was a complete disaster because of the wires and all that? And he's like, yeah, it would have been a disaster for us too. And so I don't remember exactly why he stopped doing it. If it was one of those things where they just canceled it because they didn't want to bother. Because he did do, the Captain America movie. But I don't remember, because they don't bring that one up on here exactly why they scrapped it. But I think it had to do with that from the budget standpoint, they were just like, we can't make this look decent. Like, at least Captain America, you don't have to worry about that kind of thing.
Yeah. The interviews, the talking heads that I enjoyed popping up. There's one, the writer David Engelbach. I really liked listening to him, because you could just see, I mean, I feel like being a screenwriter in Hollywood is, in a lot of respects, kind of a thankless job, because you're hired, you're pretty much a gun for hire to write a particular film or particular property, and then you kind of have to just sit back and hope and wait that it turns out something similar to your vision, I guess, right? And yeah, it was interesting listening to him. I mean, he was tasked to write Death Wish 2, and I remember he mentions, he's like, didn't that story kind of already end? Like, how are we going to do a sequel to it? But, okay, and he does. And then it was almost kind of tragic listening to him talk about Over the Top, because I'd really like to read his original script. He almost kind of alludes to the fact that arm wrestling really wasn't even in his original script, so I'd love to kind of take a look at it. But he talks about how when the final product came out, it was directed by Menahem himself, how he was kind of like, what is this here? I will say right now, I actually kind of enjoy Over the Top for its dopiness. I actually think that the father and son themes in the film are actually, I mean, people are probably going to throw stones at me for saying this, but I actually think the father and son stuff in the film is done quite well. But yeah, that one was good. There was another one. There's another person that's interviewed. It's Richard Kraft, excuse me, who is one of the music. He was a music supervisor on a number of the films. He's the gentleman in glasses who's wearing like a fedora hat and has a scarf around his neck.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, he looks kind of younger. He almost looks like too young to have been around back then in some situations.
Yeah, but he talks about he does a wonderful analogy where he says, canon films were pretty much like bowel movements. They come out and, if you don't like it, they don't feel good, whatever it may be, and then you just move on and continue with your day. And I think that was that was a great way. Though the one interview that I will say, though, sorry, but the last one the one that really hit me was his name was Rusty Lemirande.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I think I'm saying his name right. So what's interesting is he was hired by Canon. He came in at the kind of in their end, okay? And so he talks about he was directing this film, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and he was talking about how the budget just kept getting slashed and how heartbroken he was that he wasn't able to do what was a science fiction spectacle type movie, and they kept getting clipped. You know what I mean? And he uses the analogy. He says it's like a puzzle piece. Every special effect. Do you remember this? He says every special effect is a vital piece to the completed puzzle, and you're going to take that out, and it's affecting the movie. And you could just tell. It almost seems like he has some kind of unfinished or some emotions that he's still kind of holding on to about that entire experience.
Yeah, well, the thing with that one too is that I don't know the story. So that was one that Albert Pyun, because if you look at the director credit, he co-directed it, and
yep.
I believe that
I think he came in when Rusty Lemirande stepped away, which wasn't Albert Pyun known for doing that. He was kind of known for being the guy that would come in.
So it's actually the other way around. Apparently, Rusty came in and he. So right. He said that he only directed Rusty said he only directed the first 8 minutes, and the rest of it was, Albert Pyun. It was supposed to be a sequel to the Kathy Ireland film Alien from L.A., but it was sort of they kind of just like Rusty I think was one of the producers, and then he kind of had to take over as director from Pyun, but they just repackaged it as this Journey to the Center of the Earth thing. And like you said, like he just kind of probably watched it just because when you watch it, when they get to the center of the Earth, it's like, oh, this stuff is all like stuff from Alien from L.A. It's like the same characters and all that kind of stuff. And so it's because I tag it as a Pyun film, but it's one of those things too where I don't know if that was the last one that Pyun did with Canon. Like if he was out at that point, I can't remember because actually this one was 88, and actually no, he still did Captain America in the early 90s. So he did Cyborg after this as well. So Captain America, he did that. I think that was his last one with them. I don't know. One of the funny things about Cyborg, because he talks about Cyborg and that experience. The movie Deceit, I tell this story all the time, but he made the movie Deceit with equipment that Van Damme ordered for them to do reshoots. So he just used the equipment at night to film his own movie because he was so mad that he had to do the reshoots. But Rusty Lemirande is probably someone like he, working with Pyun, and probably was just like I was trying to think, thinking back to that interview, like you were saying, like it just just disappointed that they didn't get to make the movie they wanted to make.
Yeah. Again, that's Hollywood for you. We still see that to this day, even in big budget spectacles. Where a director leaves a film because he or she is not given maybe what they were promised, or maybe there's competing visions on set that it's just not worth it. But yeah, that one was really sad. It was really interesting seeing actors like Alex Winter pop up and Sybil Danning pop up. You know what I mean? It was fun seeing them. I wish I would have gotten the actress's name, but she pulls out a VHS tape and she says, this is what I thought of the movie and working with and then she takes a lighter to it and everything. I mean,
oh right, yes. It wasn't Bo Derek?
It wasn't Bo Derek.
No. Was it? Yeah, because there was some because you had Bo Derek, you had Marina Sirtis from Star Trek. She talked about being topless in one of the movies. So there's they all talk about some of the exploitation things that they had to deal with.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of any other moments from the film that stood out to me. But I mean, it's one of those ones. Like I said, I can't help but every time I watch it, I have a smile on my face and I just enjoy it because it is just. It really is. It's so well done. The editing is a lot of fun. And what's really cool about it too is, I mean, look, Canon put out hundreds of movies, and so to an extent, Mark Hartley really doesn't even. I mean, he doesn't even really touch everything that they did. But I mean, you wouldn't know. I mean, he covers so much and provides so many clips from all of their films that I think for a. What is at the end of the day, the documentary is about an hour and 50 some odd minutes, but he really does do a fantastic job providing a comprehensive history as much as he could, because I mean, if they wanted, this could be a documentary series where each episode tackles a couple films and the productions, but no, I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this could be something more like you said with the length of this one. You could do like 3 of this length of the movie, the hour and 50 minutes or so. Like you could do 3 of them and just cover like different eras, like the early 80s era, the mid 80s, and then that end period there. The one thing I think they do a great job with, though, I think, is really giving us a sense of that period, that sort of Icarus period where they're flying too close to the sun, where they pick up Superman, they do Masters of the Universe. And it's interesting too when you think of like Masters of the Universe, because I think I don't know about you, but like as a kid watching, I was like, wow, this isn't like the action figures that I remember, but it wasn't like that upset me. I just was like, okay, the cartoons are one thing, this movie's something else. I guess I was used to adaptations being their own weird things anyway, so that didn't bother me as much. I don't know if you were like, oh, this is horrible, I can't do this He-Man movie.
No, I've heard a lot of people. I mean, because look, He-Man was everything for me as a little kid. I mean, that was the film that actually got me into being a fan of Dolph Lundgren. I mean, I unabashedly adore the 1987 Masters of the Universe movie. I will say too, real quick, I feel like not only does it still hold up to an extent, but in my opinion, at least, I don't know where you stand, but if you compare Masters of the Universe to any of the other films that Canon did, not just in their early run but in their later run, I think actually Masters of the Universe actually looks the best. I think it actually looks the most polished. The special effects maybe are a little chintzy in some parts, but I feel like the sets and the costumes that they employ, the makeup on the various monsters, I think is all really well done. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also agree. I mean, Frank Langella's performance is fantastic.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I think the problem it's the story, and granted, the story was part of the reason why the story was what it was because they wanted to save money by having it set on Earth. It's interesting because, like you say, it's so polished and so well done. You wonder if they had gone with more of like a Conan the Barbarian kind of thing, because that's what the cartoon and the figures were based on. It was like this sort of like this mishmash of like Conan the Barbarian and like future things, and kind of mixing all those things together. And you almost wonder if they just went out in the in the desert somewhere, if they went out in like to Italy and like where they're making a Miles O'Keefe Ator movie or something like that, with the production values that they had, where this thing looks so nice. If that would have worked better than what we got. But I think that's the unfortunate thing, right? Is that, like you say, it looks nice, it's got great performances. It definitely, I mean, if you do the Pepsi challenge with that and like one of the Death Wish sequels, right? Like it looks like it's from a different company for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It does not, and I think even Gary Goddard says that. He didn't want it to look like a Canon movie. I remember him saying that documentary. And yeah, you're right. It looks like it was put together by a completely different company. Like I said, I've always enjoyed it. Regarding the Earth setting, You know, and I've said this on my show multiple times as well. That never bothered me as a kid. To be honest, the costumes never bothered me as a kid, and the Earth setting never bothered me as a kid. Regarding the costumes, I always looked at it in a weird way. I always looked at it as, and I remember thinking this when I was 6, 7 years old, but I remember thinking like, well, this is how He-Man and all those characters would look in real life. You know what I mean? And that's what the film is. It's an adaptation of the cartoon and everything. This is how it would look in real life. And I remember even as a little kid looking at He-Man's costume and his haircut and and all the other characters and thinking like that would look. And this is weird saying this, and I'm not just being a Monday morning quarterback coming back and saying this 30 plus years later, but I remember thinking that would look ridiculous on screen. And considering they took a toy property and a cartoon and adapted it and wanted it to appeal to multiple demographics and age ranges, I think, in my opinion at least, I think they did a competent job. Regarding the Earth setting, that was something else that never really bothered me too. I mean, if you really think about it, these are otherworldly characters, and my understanding was that for the sequel, okay, they were hoping that this was going to do really well. The sequel, well, there was multiple scripts for the sequel that are kind of floating around, but one of the scripts was that it was going to take place entirely on Eternia, and I feel like for an entry film that's going to take place in this otherworldly world with such fantastical characters, then you almost need that human component as kind of a vessel for the audience to gonna go on the journey with, so then that way they can they have a better lens into the story that's being told. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, if you think about it, they do this in a lot of films. I mean, I said this on my show, but that Sonic the Hedgehog movie, okay, that movie did not take place in Sonic's world. It definitely could have, but it doesn't. What do? They put him on Earth as well, and they have him team up with an Earthling also. Because, I mean, it's such a kind of bizarre concept with aliens and goofball characters that you need that human element. Why do you think they put humans in all the King Kong and Godzilla movies, Matt? I mean, think about it. Why are they always going to Earth for a part of it? Okay, because again, you need that human element and that human component to kind of offset the fantastical stuff. Because in the end, what I think it also does is it makes the fantastical stuff. It makes He-Man seem all the more amazing and better when you counter him with a human element. So for me, that never bothered me. And when I always hear the fans bitch about that kind of stuff, I'm kind of thinking like, really, guys? Like, really, you think that would have made it better?
Well, yeah, because I wonder, I do wonder, like, 'cause, I mean, I think the big thing, right, of course, is Dolph, where Dolph is just the perfect He-Man, it works. But, yeah, I think the story for me, I think that was the big thing. I think as a kid, I liked it. As a kid, I thought it was great. But I think coming back to me, like, well, why didn't it work? Like, why didn't it, I guess the other thing, too, thinking about why it wouldn't have come off or why it wouldn't have worked is when you watching it now, like, when I watched it as a kid, I never really considered the fact that, like, you're watching it as an adult, I was like, there's stuff that in this that might not work for kids, or it may be a little bit more, mature or older, and I think that's the other piece of it, is that it's like it may be too good for kids in a way. Like, it's kind of it didn't quite have an audience the way I think it wanted to, but it is a kind of a shame, because I think you're right. Like, it's a movie that. It's part of the downfall of canon, unfortunately, because it's one of their better ones, but it just doesn't do the money that it needs to make. But, the other thing, too, maybe this is another point we could think about with He-Man, is that maybe if they weren't hedging with so many other movies when they made it, or if there wasn't this idea that, like, they'd already spent the money on He-Man, and they needed He-Man to, like, make so much money, if He-Man could have just been He-Man, kind of the way that John Wick with Lionsgate can just be John Wick, right? And they it makes 4 times its budget every time. I think that maybe that's what He-Man needed to be, right? It needed to not be the thing that canon was pinning all of its hopes on and putting all its money into. It needed to just be He-Man and let it kind of grow into whatever it was going to be as a blockbuster.
No, yeah, you're exactly right. And what's really interesting too is, I mean, that film came out around the same time as Superman 4. And if you look at Masters of the Universe compared to Superman 4, I mean, man, it almost feels like you said, Masters of the Universe was put together by a different company, or maybe they put all of the money into Masters of the Universe, and then they were left with scraps with Superman 4. I mean, I'll admit, I remember watching Superman 4 as a little kid, and I always remember watching it and thinking, like, something is missing here. And then watching the documentary and then looking at the backstory of Superman 4 and reading the various articles about it, you see just what a completely, it was a production that almost, it lifted off when it didn't even really have legs to lift off. You know what I mean? And so I remember watching that one as a kid, and it just felt weird. It felt like the story was incomplete in a lot of ways, which, as we found out, it really was. You know what I mean? And there were... I mean, the one thing I always remember with Superman 4 that always just bothered the hell out of me was there is the scene where the antagonist, Nuclear Man, takes Mariel Hemingway. He pretty much kidnaps her, and he takes her up into space. And Superman has to get her back. And I remember as a little kid thinking to myself, like... What? You can't breathe in outer space. Everybody knows you can't breathe in outer space, and that part just baffled me. And you watch it and you think, like, there wasn't any quality control of any kind going on to where they realized even something small like that. Like, guys, come on. You know what I mean?
Well, that, and I wondered, talking about from the budget standpoint, I wonder if the budget went into convincing, Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman and Margot Kidder to come back and do their roles, because I thought, maybe I'm wrong with this, but I thought like Christopher Reeve said he was done with Superman after number 3, that he wasn't going to do another Superman movie, and I think Gene Hackman as well. I think they were like, we're done with doing Superman. So I think Cannon threw a lot of money at them to get them to come back, kind of like what you're talking about with Stallone, where they threw a lot of money at Stallone to get him to make a picture with them. And so I think there wasn't much left. I mean, the movie itself is only an hour and a half long. It's, like you said, it doesn't look like it's by the same company that would have made the blockbuster in He-Man. It's Sidney J. Fury directed it, which I think as Dolph fans, right, we know at least Attention, I think, right? I think he's done a couple Dolph movies, right? But that's what he does now. He does direct-to-video Dolph movies, and things like that. But he's directing the Superman movie, so and we look at it now and say, like, okay, yeah, the whole concept was sautéed in wrong sauce from the beginning. But I think that's again with like Menachem Golan. He's just like, oh, it's Superman. We're gonna make a ton of money, and I'm making a Superman movie. And instead of being like, okay, how do we do this in the right way? By the time they get to Captain America, suddenly the budgets were slashed, and they were like, okay, no, we're going to make this as cheaply as possible, and became a different thing. It's fascinating when you get to that late '80s period when they're because the other thing too is we're talking about movies that we remember being in the theater, that we remember the ads, like, oh, Superman 4, it's going to be and it's canon and all of that stuff. And it's not knowing as a kid that these are movies that are completely destroying, or not destroying, but they're kind of signaling the end for this production company.
Yeah. I mean, but what I will say about Superman 4, there's a couple things to say about it, but I mean, one of the things that I do appreciate about it is, yes, it is the worst of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, which, considering the third one put Richard Pryor into the mix, is certainly saying something, I will say. But what I'll give it credit for is it's still a Superman movie. Like, it still feels like it exists in the same universe as the other ones. You know what I mean? So often we see whenever another studio or whenever another director takes over a beloved franchise or property or something, well, then they kind of put their spin on it, and it just has a different flavor. It has it feels, it's very clear that, okay, this is a character, this is, characters that we've grown up with, but they're coming out of a new house, and it just doesn't feel right. I mean, the thing that I will give Superman 4 credit for is it still feels like, it exists in that same universe, and it still feels like a Superman movie. It still has a signature score. They did bring back Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, and so I can't knock it for that. And what's really interesting too, again, going along with canon, okay, and the kind of guys they were, is Yeah, you mentioned they did give Christopher Reeve a ton of money for him to come back. I mean, because if you think about it, Superman 3 had come out in 83. Okay, and so for him to come back 4 years later, okay, was kind of a gamble. Okay, so they did offer him a big paycheck. They did offer him some creative control, and they also agreed to do a movie that is actually not covered in Electric Boogaloo, but he did a film called Street Smart. Have you seen Street Smart?
Oh yes, that's right. So I didn't realize. So that was part of his deal to do Superman, was that he agreed to do Street Smart as well.
Bingo. Yeah, that was the big thing, and because he wanted to do a film that was like the complete opposite of Superman, where he was, kind of a an immoral person, we should say, or whatever. And I mean, we talked earlier. This is kind of coming full circle, actually. I mean, but talk about one of Canon films that one of their really good movies they did that doesn't get a whole lot of respect or credit, but Street Smart is amazing. Okay, Christopher Reeve is awesome in that film as a corrupt journalist, and Morgan Freeman, who was nominated, we should say, for an Academy Award. Okay, as in his role as the pimp in Street Smart. Okay, I mean, he does an amazing job as well, and so. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. As crappy as Superman 4 is, we do have it to thank because it did give us a really good Christopher Reeve performance.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So that's something I didn't know, but it makes sense. It's like one of those things that make, like, I remember when Sister Act 2 was coming out. I remember MTV did because MTV used to do these like specials on new movies where they would interview the cast and stuff like that, and they're interviewing Kathy Najimy about Sister Act 2, and it was like, yeah, the only reason why she came back to do Sister Act 2 was because they promised her 3 more movies at the studio, and then of course Whoopi got more money, and it was like Christopher Connolly was like, is this movie going to be any good? When we like nobody wanted to be a part of it to begin with, but yeah, same thing I guess with Christopher Reeves, right? That he wanted something different from Superman. And you make a great point that I never considered before about that, is that idea that this slots in with the other 4, because, you think of like, that new Fantastic Four movie that came out in 2015, which I think is like one of the worst comic book movies ever made. I think, people saying Madam Web is one of the worst when that movie exists. And just the ideas that they came up with for Fantastic Four just blow my mind. That, we're going to have them be kids, we're going to have them not go into space but go to a different dimension, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's something to be said for saying, like, no, we're just going to follow up on the sequels. We're not going to reboot it. I guess it's like with Spider-Man, right? Was the situation was that they were going to make a 4th movie, right, with Sam Raimi, and he was like, I can't make it in the amount of time you want me to make it in. I think he was like between 3 and 4. There were delays, and they were like, "Oh, we need it out like in a year or something like that." And he's like, "I can't do it that quickly." Turn around. They're like, "Okay, we're just going to reboot it then. We're just going to do a whole new version of Spider-Man." There is something to be said for kind of continuing in the what was done before and making it work in that sense, and that way that Canon could have just as easily, right, said, "Oh, we're not going to pay all this money for Christopher Reeve and Gene Hackman. We'll just use Michael Dudikoff to be Superman," or something like that. So the fact that they did it that way, I agree with you there. There's something to be said for that. We can watch, 4 Superman movies, and there are at least 4 Superman movies. They're not like 3 in a reboot or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, look, God bless Canon for trying. Okay, I mean they saw money in the Masters of the Universe franchise as well as Superman as well. I mean, but they came to the table too late with it, and that's really what's unfortunate. Okay, they came to the table. I mean, when the Masters of the Universe movie had gone into production and when it had come out of when it came out in theaters, the toy sales were dropping off, exponentially. Okay, and so it wasn't the big #1 toy line like it once was. And I mean, Superman, like I said, it had been almost 5 years since the last film. I don't think people were really clamoring for a Superman movie, and if they were, I think they wanted something a little bit different. I mean, and if you compare that to nowadays, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it took us how long till we got another Superman movie once again? Okay, between 1987 to 2006, we finally got another Superman movie. That didn't turn out very well, and then we had to wait another few years, 2013, to get another iteration of it. I mean, these things all come in waves, but you got to give the way I look at it with Canon, with these guys, is I think in the end they went down swinging. You know what I mean? Like and I think in the end, I mean, look, would I go down swinging? Would I even step up to bat if I didn't have enough money to begin with? Probably not. I mean, but for them to take those chances and to take a few swings, okay, even when the deck was stacked against them, like it so very clearly was, is pretty remarkable, and it's a really really cool story. And I could see, I mean. I mean, we see this all the time on like Hulu and Netflix and whatnot. You know, these like kind of mini series about real life events and stories. I personally think that would make an awesome a mini series for like Hulu or something. You know what I mean? Can you imagine that, a 6-part mini series on the Go Go Boys and their journey from Israel to making exploitive action and horror movies and how they rose and fall. I think that would be hilarious.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because one of the things I think, if there's any, I don't want to say criticism of this documentary, but one of the things about it is because it is only that hour and 50 minutes long, that you get these errors, like for example the Chuck Norris Charles Bronson period, where these movies are coming out like Death Wish 3, which is just like this like idea that like LA is just sort of like this like escape from New York, post-apocalyptic, escape from the Bronx kind of world where, Paul Kersey's got to have like a howitzer or machine gun or something blowing people away and stuff like that, and then we get Alex Winter, who's being interviewed about it, like being on the set for that movie. You've got that at the same time that you've got like, Zeffirelli films, right? Or these other movies. So it is one of those things where it's almost like a whirlwind when you're watching it from the documentary, that like all these things are coming at you, which actually, now that I'm saying it to you, it actually kind of makes more sense that way, because you get that whirlwind sense of like what canon was like when they're just kind of bouncing around between projects so quickly like that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's no wonder there wasn't a heck of a lot of quality control, because they were constantly going from multiple productions. And you hear about for example the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel that they did, Texas Chainsaw Part 2, how it was more of a comedy, that they weren't anticipating that, when in reality, if you look at the first one is kind of a very dark satire comedy as is, so it kind of only made sense that maybe that's how Tobe Hooper went with it. But they were also kind of disenfranchised with what he did with Invaders from Mars, which was just a wild story as is. What were some of the other ones? They had the idea of Spider-Man. They thought that Spider-Man... Can we just say, first of all, real quick, it is wild to think that there was a time when a studio like Canon could own the rights to characters like Spider-Man and Captain America for pennies. It is wild to think that there was a time when... studios did not see value in those characters. Flash forward to today, and look what we have nowadays. But in any case, they talk about how Menahem thought that Spider-Man was a literal half man, half spider, and that's kind of how he wanted to make the movie. I mean, it's stories like that it in a weird way, it just makes it all the more endearing and charming in a weird, in a very odd way. I mean, these guys, I think, as we kind of come back to it, I think these guys, they remind me as that of that kid who transfers to a new high school, okay, and has no real experience playing football, but decides, no, I'm gonna run with the big dogs and I'm gonna play on varsity, and you know what I mean? and they're suddenly on the varsity team, completely out of their element and not trying their best, but. Kind of like that movie with Corey Haim. What was that movie with Corey Haim where he played football with Charlie Sheen? Lucas, right? Yeah. Just getting his ass kicked, but you know what? Hey, he keeps getting up and trying. That's kind of how I look at the Canon guys.
I always feel like with the Canon guys, it's that metaphor, only they run the ball in the wrong direction, and when everybody tells them they're running in the wrong direction, they say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm winning. I'm doing the right thing here. And they find out later that they weren't winning. But I mean, to be fair, I mean, I mean, they have left us with some classics, some absolute like action classics. With like Invasion USA, the American Ninja movies. A lot of those Dudikoff movies. Of course, the whole ninja craze, right? The Shokazugi ninja movies. So they really put a stamp on things, and I think you're right that they were like the progenitors of this sort of studio system that comes out in the '90s that unfortunately gets swallowed up by the big boys by the end of the '90s. But in the '90s, we had studios like Carolco, I guess like '80s into the '90s. But Carolco, Orion, why can't I think of it? I'm completely drawing a blank on the Friday the 13th. Or say the Nightmare on Elm Street guys. I can't believe I just drew a blank on that studio that was doing those. But all those studios that were kind of lower ones, that eventually get bought out by the big boys. They eventually, we get everything consolidated, because that's kind of what's happening with everything in America right now anyways. Big companies are buying out all the small ones. But there was a period when it worked, and then of course, we also had PM, which was... No, I don't think, I always think of PM as being sort of like the next wave, like, the Canon wave crashes and recedes, and then PM comes in. But PM was something totally different, where they were just, if it wasn't for Spiro Rosatos and just being like, hey, Spiro Rosatos, why don't you just like do the most ridiculous stunts that you possibly could do? I don't know what PM's legacy would have been. But PM was definitely not going to be taking on Superman or Spider-Man or they wouldn't even touch probably a Roger Corman Fantastic Four, let alone Masters of the Universe or something like that. So canon was its own thing at that time, and it was this fascinating chapter in movie history, and especially in that '80s period when we with this new blockbuster period with guys like Spielberg and Lucas.
Yeah, definitely, that's a great way of putting it. But no, I mean, if I had to pick my all-time favorite documentaries, Electric Boogaloo is easily going to be one of my all-time favorites. I think it's just anybody who's out there. If you're a fan of Canon, then obviously I imagine you've already seen it. But even if you're not a fan of Canon and you love hearing about just the nitty-gritty of what it takes to get a movie off the ground and make it be a success, okay, I think this is a wonderful film to view. I mean, and it's just fun. I mean, like I said, the score that is employed throughout it is excellent. And I mean, Mark Hartley does an amazing job of balancing all of the footage from the various films. I mean, yes, we can say he does tend to show the sleazier parts of a lot of these movies, so you could say that maybe it's fairly one-sided in that respect. But I think he does a wonderful job of balancing all of that with all of the various talking heads. And man, there's just a slew of people who are involved and who are interviewed, to where, I mean, it's really great because you watch it and you think, oh yeah, either A, I forgot about that person, or B, like, I had no idea that they were in the Canon family. And it just proves just how far-reaching their pull was, and how they were able to attract so many for their little cheesy films.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think for one of the things, too, just looking at demographics of people who listen to the podcast, we have a lot of younger listeners. And so for younger listeners, and this documentary is actually on Tubi now. So it was on YouTube for a while, but now it's on Tubi. It's... you should check it out, because it gives you this slice of time, and like you said, the names that you're going to see come up. I mean, Sharon Stone did movies with Canon, and they talk about what it was like working with her. All those kinds of things. It's definitely worth checking out. I think it's something that everybody should check out, and everybody, and now that it's on Tubi, it's definitely worth taking a look at. All right, so yeah, I guess at this point we're close to wrapping up. So, Sean, anything you want to plug?
Well, I mean, first of all, can I say that it was an absolute pleasure chatting this film with you. I always love, documentaries. It's interesting. The older I get, I find myself watching more documentaries than anything else, and I just love finding a small little one and not only exposing someone else to it, but getting to chat about it at great length. So this has been a ton of fun. Can I real quick before I plug my show? Can I just recommend one more documentary?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
needs to be seen, that doesn't get talked about a heck of a lot, that I just think is awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's actually also on Tubi as well, but it's called The Imposter. I don't know if you've heard of that one or not, but that one is a true crime one, but about a pretty much a French con man who convinces a family in America that he is their long lost child, and he poses. He's a grown man, but he poses as a child, and he cons the entire family. It's sick. It's completely bizarre, but man, it is absolutely fascinating to watch. So it's on Tubi as well, but I highly recommend The Imposter.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. Do you know what year it is? Because I think there's a few things that are listed as Imposter.
2012 or 2013, I believe that one came out. But yeah, it's pretty wild. But yeah, no. In any case, I had a ton of fun, Matt. I mean, it's always great talking with you, as as always. But yeah, this has been a ton of fun. Regarding my particular podcast, it's kind of bittersweet, but as of this recording, I actually just released the final episode. When I'll be putting out another episode is pretty much, it's really up in the air, to be honest, because I'm all caught up with the films of Dolph Lundgren. We came full circle with the show, and finished it with the Rocky IV director's cut, so I figured that was kind of a good bookend to kind of wrap it up. You know, we started with Rocky IV as episode 1, and then episode 108 is the Rocky IV director's cut. So I feel like I've kind of come to the end of the road, but it's been a ton of fun. It is still out there, and where I'll go next, I really don't know, but you've been gracious enough to guest on a few of the episodes, so yeah, I encourage anyone who has not listened to the show and is curious about the extensive films of Mr. Lundgren. There's 108 episodes out there, with dozens of interview episodes as well, with directors, writers, actors, etc.
Excellent. Yeah, that's. So I saw that it just released. I've been meaning to listen to it myself. So that one is the last one that you put up. So so for people listening here, I will tell people listening here though, even though you posted the last new episode, there's so many great ones in the archives that they should go back and listen to, because it's a combination of, you know, conversations with people like myself about the movies, but then also those behind the scenes conversations that you have, where, I mean, I think you do obviously I always talk about the Benjamin Sachs interview, so that one, of course, always, there, but I mean, Alex Merkin, I know, where when you talked about Pops Stallone, I can't remember his name, but the guy who does the World War II movies, like War Pigs, and I don't know if he did the other one, I can't think of the name of it now, the most recent, Come Out Fighting.
Oh yeah, it's Stephen Luke. Yeah, no, he wrote War Pigs, but then he wrote and directed the most recent. Pretty much, Dolph filmed 2 World War II movies back to back.
That's right.
And he wrote and directed both of those. I kind of wonder if maybe there was some tax write-off deals going there or something like that at the moment for both of them to do those. But yeah.
Yeah, they're always great. I mean, they really give some really great insight. So yeah, for people listening, I Must Break This podcast. There'll be a link in the podcast description. So when you look up your podcast description, you can pull the link there if you're not already subscribed to it. But definitely check it out. And like you said, it's bittersweet that you've come to the end of it, but so many great episodes for people to check out.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I couldn't. It was shows like this that kind of inspired me to embark on that journey. So thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you as well. And I agree. This was a really fun conversation. This is a movie that I'd been meaning to watch for a long time. I finally saw that it was on YouTube, and I watched it there, but it's actually on Tubi now. So for people listening, go check this one out on Tubi.
Definitely.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Sean, for coming on. It was a really fun conversation, and thank you everybody for listening. And we'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.
the